All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started then. So good morning. My name is Kelly Hattori, and today I'm hosting the Bureau Seminar Series. And today for our speaker, we have Dr. Tamie Jovanelly coming from Berry College. So Dr. Tamie Jovanelly, she's an associate professor there in Mount Berry, Georgia. She received her PhD from Kent State University, her master's from the University of Nebraska, and her bachelor's from the University of Michigan. Over 15 years, her research has been broad scoping and impressive. In fact, her contributions to the field of geosciences have just been recognized for a sustained record of distinguished contributions to the geosciences when she was awarded the Geological Society of America Fellow in spring 2021. Recently, Dr. Jovanelly is the sole author of the award-winning monograph titled Iceland: Tectonics, Volcanics, and Glacial Features, which is published by Wiley in 2020. In continuation with her investigations in climate change, she received a research scientist position on the cruise to Svalbard in 2021. Additionally, she is classically trained as a hydrologist and has completed water quality assessments on 5 continents, comparing developed, underdeveloped, and developing countries while focusing on major river systems such as the Nile, the Ganges, the Amazon, Mississippi, and others. In 2017 through 2019, she was awarded a U.S. Fulbright research position with the Nacional Universidad of Costa Rica to study water resources in national parks. This came after she completed her first Fulbright research assignment in 2013-2014 with Makerere University in Uganda, where she focused on forest hydrology, a project funded by the National Geographic Society. She has published journal articles in Sustainable Water Resources Management 2020, International Journal of One Health 2020, Journal of Public Health in Developing Countries 2016, Journal of Water and Health, World Health Organization Press 2014. Dr. Jovanelly just concluded an appointment as a U.S. Fulbright specialist, whereby allowing her to consult on worldwide water conservation, allocation, and quality issues. So join me in giving a hand to Dr. Tamie Jovanelly. And Tamie, if you would like to go ahead and share your screen, you can take it away.
Sure.
Oh, and as a reminder to everybody else, please hold your questions until the end, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end.
So thank you for the introduction. Again, my name is Dr. Tamie Jovanelly, and I am an associate professor of geology at Berry College. And Berry College is located in the Appalachian foothills, just about an hour north of Atlanta, Georgia. So that's where I'm coming to you today. And I'm really excited to be the Association for Women Geoscientists Distinguished Lecturer. And I have been an AWG member since 1999. So for 22 years, I was a graduate student at University of Nebraska, and I became a student delegate. And then later I became a secretary, and I've just rotated back onto the board as the communication coordinator. So AWG has been really important in my career as a student and also in my professional development. So I'm excited to be able to give back. The title of my talk today is Exploring the Quality of Major River Systems and Lessons Learned in Conservation. So I'm going to be focusing on more of big picture ideas, but certainly if you have more specific questions about the water quality analysis and how I do that, I'm happy to answer those questions in the Q&A. And before we go any further, I've been doing water quality assessments since 2006. And my research has been funded by the National Geographic Society, the Reuther Foundation, and also Fulbright, as you just heard. And I want to mention here too that I'm currently the president of the Georgia Fulbright chapter. It's the second largest chapter in the United States. So if you have specific questions about Fulbright grants, either as a student, a professor, or there's also opportunities for professional development, I'm happy to talk to you about that also. So we will get started. And as mentioned in my bio, I'm classically trained as a hydrologist. So it makes a lot of sense for me to begin in speaking about the water cycle. So when I'm looking at global water quality signatures, as basic as it may sound, I really do start in thinking in terms of where the precipitation is and where it's going. And that's because I focus on the quality of major river systems, but anytime I'm in the field, if I have access to groundwater systems, maybe through springs, or if I have access to wells, I certainly am paying attention to those and trying to sample. And then of course, surface water systems too, like lakes. And what we need to recognize is that the water cycle is always like evolving, right, and changing, especially with climate change. So as an example, if I'm collecting data in Iceland during December, that data set's going to look very different than if I'm collecting water quality analysis in Iceland in June or July. And that's because Iceland is at 66 degrees north, right? And so it's making a comparison between a winter season and a summer season. So in July, there's 22 hours of daylight. So the hydrology of those river systems is going to be completely intensified compared to that December signature. Additionally, I do a lot of work at the equator. So whether that's East Africa or Costa Rica, I have to pay attention to whether I'm sampling during the green season or the gold season. And that's just nice ways to talk about the wet season versus the dry season. So I'm paying attention to my seasonality, and I'm looking at the interconnectedness of these systems. But I also recognize too that because I'm looking at global signatures, I might not have the luxury of visiting these locations more than once. So paying attention to a water budget and understanding really the inflows and outflows and how those storages change over time is important to my research. And I intentionally do a whole lot of background study and talking a lot with my collaborators before I go into the field, because I want my signatures to be the best that they possibly can be. So understanding and tackling this as a systems approach has really proven to be something that has made my data set successful. And ultimately, what I'm trying to do with my global water quality assessments is understand whether water is really clean or dirty. And it really just comes down to that primitive idea. And how I'm doing this is I'm using both Environmental Protection Agency standards and World Health Organization standards. And you can see those listed on the screen here. And I'm looking at chemical, physical, and biological signatures. And on the screen, you're seeing the standards for optimal drinking water, and comparing EPA versus WHO, they're relatively similar. EPA is a little bit stringent in some of those categories, but what I need you to recognize is that I am looking at signatures for developed, undeveloped, and developing countries. And so in those undeveloped and developing countries, they might not have the luxury to identify what their body of water is being used for solely. So in the United States, we can delineate drinking water standards specific to drinking water, but maybe in a place like India, the areas that they're using for drinking water, they're also using for recreation, and they're also obtaining discharge permits for industry. So we have that benefit in the United States, but in other parts of the globe, they might not have that. So I'm looking for drinking water standards to also try to characterize water bodies as a whole. And you might be interested as to how I ended up studying global water and the quality in the first place. And I received my PhD in 2006. And I realized that with that PhD, I had some responsibility. And I really took that to heart when I started to think about the direction of my academic career. So for my PhD, I studied tsunamis, and I did a lot of fluvial sedimentology, and I did a lot of hazard mitigating mapping, and I still do that. But I looked back to my master's degree work, looking at groundwater and surface water interactions, and I really thought that I could make a difference in understanding these systems. And as I was exploring directions for my research to go, I came across the United Nations Millennium Development Goals that were first established in 2006. And when I came across these in 2006, I realized that I could probably make a contribution into answering and solving some of these global issues. So the United Nations Millennium Development Goals are looking at global challenges and asking questions on how we can solve them. So you see 8 of them listed on the screen, and they range from eradicating poverty, reducing childhood mortality, trying to combat malaria. And I became most interested in target goal number 7, ensuring environmental sustainability. And with specific to that, I focused on target 7C. So I was able to contribute about 9 years of data to the Millennium Development Goals. And on the screen, you'll see that what they were trying to accomplish was by 2015, have the proportion of people without sustainable access to safe drinking water and basic sanitation. When we arrived at 2015, there was a lot of success. So also, as you can read, the world has now met the Millennium Development Goal targets relating to the access to safe drinking water. In 2012, 90% of the population used an improved source of drinking water compared with 76% in 1990. However, as stated by the Millennium Development Goals in 2015 report, progress has been uneven across different regions, uneven between urban and rural areas, and uneven between rich and poor areas. And certainly within my data sets, I see this as well. Uneven across different regions, that could even be uneven across a small country. And when we talk about the differences between rich and poor, we can even talk about caste systems. So caste systems are still very much in place in India. And so we can see how different socioeconomic classes have more access or less access to clean water and sanitation. So in moving forward after 2015, the United Nations expanded their development goals. And so they're now called Sustainable Development Goals. And this charge is from 2015 to 2030. So we are about 6 years into these new ideas and platforms. So as you can see on the screen here, the initial Millennium Development Goals have been expanded into 17 different parameters so that we can focus more of our attention on the specifics of what we're trying to answer. So as you can see now, there's number 13 that has to do with climate action, 14, life below the water, 15, life on land. So expanding more focused attention onto what the environment looks like. And for me, I'm focused on target number 6, and that is to ensure clean water and sanitation. So per this new charge, with regard to basic sanitation, the Millennium Development Goal target was not met globally, right? We saw that on the last slide. In 2012, 2.5 billion people did not have access to improved sanitation facilities, with 1 billion of these people still practicing open defecation. So highlighting really on sanitation and specifically recognizing that the number of people living in urban areas without access to improved sanitation is increasing because of rapid growth in the size of urban populations. And that is also something that I see in the developing and undeveloped countries that I have been to. So I was really motivated and still am motivated to collect data and try to provide solutions and how we can answer some of these charges set by the United Nations. And with respect to target number 6, it's broken down into 4 specific categories. So we could talk in terms of water scarcity. I'm probably most interested in the quality of the water being provided, infrastructure needs, and sanitation. But as you can imagine, these 4 parameters are intimately linked. So if you don't have an abundance of water, then likely the quality of that water is going to be compromised. If you don't have an abundance of water, likely you're trying to pond or dam that water, and that's going to obviously increase maybe malaria, and you're probably sharing that water source maybe with cattle. So then the quality of that water, of course, is going to decrease. And if you don't have infrastructure or sanitation, that's also going to affect the quality of the water. So again, I focus on first and foremost the quality of the water, and I do that by collecting what we call water quality assessments. And these water quality assessments are defining physical, chemical, and biological signatures of the watershed. And specifically, how I go about doing this is I'm using the National Sanitation Foundation recommendations that were established in 1970. And this group established 9 different parameters that are best representing what the overall quality of the water can look like. So in the field and in very primitive laboratory conditions, I am looking for pH, temperature, dissolved oxygen, biological oxygen on demand, nitrates, phosphates, turbidity, fecal coliform, and total suspended solids. And why I'm doing this, because these parameters established by the National Sanitation Foundation in 1970 can be put into something that's called a water quality index value. And the water quality index value takes that hard data that I collect in the field. We can do some fancy math and we can use those 9 parameters to calculate one percentage. And so that percentage might be 100% or that percentage might be 0%. But the beauty of this is that I have real data that is combined to represent a field location. And what I've been able to do is that even in the most rural communities, I can share this data by talking to them in terms of a percentage. So I can go to a community and say, what do you think your water quality is at this drinking water source? And they might say, well, we think the water quality is good. It tastes fine. And I can say, well, I'm a scientist. I've done some research. I find that your water quality is medium. Do you think there's anything that you can do to improve the water quality in your area? And so I can use the water quality index as a means to communicate ideas and to open up discussion. So in a rural community, they might not understand dissolved oxygen, but they can understand that green means good and red means bad. And usually we can have some interpretation to understand percentages. So it's been a really useful tool to communicate ideas and to open discussion and to look for solutions in especially in developing and undeveloped countries. And I mentioned that I started my very first water quality assessments in 2006. So I've been at this for 15 years now. But initially, as a young scientist, when I went to publish my data, I got a whole lot of criticism. And the criticism had to do with the type of field instrumentation that I was using. But what I had to communicate is I am truly collecting pioneering water quality data sets. So I'm going to places where nobody has been before. So in a place like rural Uganda, I might be truly living in a tent 300 miles away from electricity. And even in East Africa, like they don't have instrumentation like an ICP. I can't even go to Makerere University and expect to find elaborate analytical instrumentation. So it took me a while to communicate the value of my data sets and using these portable instrumentation. But because I don't have, again, access to, I don't have access, usually to energy sources. There might not be ice, so I can't like collect a sample and take it back to a lab, and then there's not a lab. But truly, what I'm trying to do with my water quality analysis is I'm really trying to, again, collect this data and put it into a water quality index to open discussions with people in these remote areas. And again, the areas that I'm collecting this data in is challenging. So I might be hiking in monsoon season, carrying a bag of equipment, but there's other nasties in the environment that we have to be conscious of too. So sometimes you have to collect your data more quickly. Maybe there's crocodiles, maybe there's black mambas, maybe there's scorpions. I've even been in remote places of Uganda on the Congo border where there's like all of a sudden been guerrilla warfare. So doing the best I can to collect these really interesting and unique and important signatures have contributed to the ideas of understanding the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals established by the United Nations. And so I just wanted to present to you what one of these water quality index values look like. So this is for a location along the Ganges River in India. And again, I'm collecting these 9 parameters, and by the National Sanitation Foundation, they've assigned weighted parameters. So they feel like when you're looking at a body of water, the dissolved oxygen is likely the most important. So it has a higher weighted value. So you do some math, you do some conversions, and then each of those parameters represents a percentage that can total 100%. So for this field location in India, it is given an overall WQI of 63.96. So it has a medium range. There's a way that we can look at that and talk about improvements and solutions to that by looking at this of that data set, because as you are aware, each of these parameters too are intimately linked. So if I'm in a place like in Brazil where they've clear cut the forest, now the Amazon River isn't shaded, so your temperature of your water, of course, is going to increase. And as your temperature increases, your dissolved oxygen decreases. And likely, if it's been clear cut for agriculture or for cattle, you're going to have quicker runoff of E. coli into your water. And additionally, you might have increased turbidity from erosion, and that's going to cause your temperature to go up and your dissolved oxygen to go down. So we can approach this by first looking at the overall quality of the water to see if we're concerned, and then we can focus our attention back on those individual parameters to answer questions and to offer solutions. So on the screen, you'll see some of my field locations. I have had the opportunity to do water quality assessments on 5 different continents, again, focusing on major river systems in developed, undeveloped, and developing countries. With the pandemic, obviously I couldn't travel abroad. I've been abroad nearly every summer since 2006. So I turned my attention back to the United States. So I did a little bit more research along the Mississippi River, but I've also sampled the Ohio River, and in Georgia, the Coosa River's in our backyard. So I've done a lot of work there too. What you'll learn at the end of the presentation is Iceland has pretty much become my second home. And so I've done a lot of work in Iceland, and I've done a lot of work in East Africa. So focusing on the Nile River, but also on Lake Victoria. Lake Victoria is the 2nd largest lake in the world, and Lake Victoria is the source of the water for the Nile. It discharges in Jinja, Uganda, and then the Nile, of course, flows through Sudan and Egypt. So they're important resources for that northern eastern portion of Africa. I've spent time along the Ganges River. I spent a whole lot of time at the headwaters in a place called Rishikesh, and then I was able to follow the Ganges all the way till Calcutta. And then in Europe, outside of Iceland, I've been sampling at a random different places. So whether that's locations in Spain, I've done a lot of sampling in Italy. I've touched on England, and I've also touched on France. And then in Central America, I focused my attention on Costa Rica. And I'm looking at major river systems, but I'm also focusing my attention on important forest reserves. As an example, we're very familiar with the biodiversity and the importance of that in Costa Rica, but understanding that the hydrology of those forests is what supports that biodiversity. So collecting a baseline data set has been integral into understanding if those systems are improving or degrading. So you have to have the baseline of that water that's going to tell you something about the health of that overall forest. So it's been a really interesting journey. I have a pending research grant. Hopefully they'll take me to Australia in 2023. And so as you can imagine, if we look at just a very broad water quality index for these locations. As you probably would imagine, Iceland has the best at about 95%, and East Africa and India have the least of those. And with 60% kind of representing the overall quality of the Ganges, and then 63% along Lake Victoria and the Nile. And as you can see for the United States, I'm ranking that at about 76%. So we have some work to do even in our backyard. So again, the water quality index value kind of gives us a baseline to understand if systems are improving or degrading over time, and asking questions of what we can do to improve those. And in comparing developed, undeveloped, and developing countries, 4 parameters that I've also like to speak to is thinking in terms of the poverty index, population growth, lacking infrastructure, and the reliability of electricity, and what their overall public health system looks like. So we can use Uganda as an example for this. Uganda has a poverty index value of 82%, and that means that 82% of their population only makes about $5.50 per day. When we look at the population growth of Uganda, it's growing plus or minus at 4. And that's significant because the population of that country is at about 45 million people. So 4% of that growing annually is significant. And although in areas like the city of Kampala and the major city of Entebbe, they do have road systems. They had a somewhat reliable electric grid, but because of that population growth, and when we look at the demographics of Uganda, what we see is that the population is between 18 and 35 years old. So you've got this really explosion of youth that doesn't have much work. And so they're fleeing to the cities to try to find something to do and to earn a living. So the rate at which a population has growth and the hunger for work has drawn Ugandans to those capital cities and has put stress on their energy grid, and of course stress on their sanitation systems. One thing that has also proven to be useful in my exploration and understanding global water quality is to ask questions about how people relate to their watersheds. So on the screen, you'll see a man, and he is along the Amazon River, and he is filleting piranha. They're delicious, by the way. So he's filleting piranha, and he's either going to eat these piranha, or more likely he's going to sell the fish to earn some money. And within the Amazon River, very similar to the Nile River, there's a deep economic tie to those systems. Amazon River has proven to be still pretty biodiverse. What's different is if we compare that to Lake Victoria or the Nile. And in the Nile, there are now these invasive perch, and they're anywhere from 6, 7, or 8 feet long. So you get these giant fish that have disseminated the ecology of the river. And so people have become reliant upon harvesting those Nile perch, but it's just not something that is sustainable for the ecosystem, and is not really sustainable for their economy. Additionally, in looking at the Ganges River, what I found is that the Ganges River is really revered in the Hindu religion. So people throughout their life try to pilgrimage to the Ganges River if they don't live there, because they want to purify themselves and purify their souls. And in a place like Varanasi that's seen on the screen, people will pilgrimage here to die, like literally, and either their bodies are cremated and become part of a ceremony, but if they don't have the money to do that, then oftentimes their bodies are thrown into the Ganges River to decompose. And if people have come to Varanasi with diseases like leprosy, etc., they're not often cremated, they're put into the Ganges River to decompose. So the Ganges River then is very important in their religion. And so that conservation message might be different than when we look at the Nile River, because the Nile River is perceived very dangerous because there's hippos, there's crocodiles, there's water vipers. There is a parasite that's called bilharzia that you can pick up from being in contact with the water. And in addition, a lot of people don't know how to swim. And so it's seen as a very deadly place, even though they're reliant upon it for economics. So the message of conservation there too might be very different. And then we can ask questions about, well, how do we share a resource, and how do we conserve a resource? And so looking at places like Iceland has been very interesting. So as I mentioned, the water quality is great in Iceland. Their population density is very low. There's only 300,000 people that live on the island. But in talking with Icelanders who live in Iceland, they're very in tune with their natural environment, and they have a great love for protecting it. So they recognize that they have some responsibility to be sustainable, and they appreciate the beauty of which Iceland provides too. So even though they have an abundance of water, they choose to be really specific on how they're using the water. And also, if we look at two examples in rural East Africa, if these girls are hiking miles to obtain water, like, they're not going to waste a drop either. So the idea of scarcity is really important. And I think it's certainly it's important to our sustainable development goals, but even more important as we consider how our climate is changing and how much of the world is going to likely have to come across these scarcity issues. It's important to look at what people are doing and how they're responding to water scarcity issues at present day. And so, so my goal then is to not just test the water and identify problems, but to identify solutions and infrastructure and sanitation. And there's a variety of different ways that we can tackle that depending on where we are. But it might be as simple as moving cattle and not having them share the resource in a specific location. So you see on the screen one of my research assistants in the field, and she's taking a sample of water, and then you can see the cows in the background. So it was a location where people were washing their clothes, they were gathering the drinking water, and they were allowing the cattle to utilize that water resource also. And we saw a great improvement in their overall health by just simply asking them to move the cattle a bit more downstream from where they're collecting their drinking water. So I've really made it important in my pursuit of science to think in terms of solutions. And in thinking in terms of solutions to answer those sustainable development goals and the challenges that we see, I've really found it to be probably most important to be culturally sensitive in these different places that I'm going, and to seek to listen before I speak. And I mentioned that I've done water quality sampling in India. So as an example, I lived at an ashram for a summer at the headwaters of the Ganges River in Rishikesh. And as I did that, I really learned about the Hindu religion from my yoga teacher and a Swami. And and what I learned about the Hindu religion is how important the cows are to them. And so if you go any place in India, the cows are roaming freely, and that might not be best for the water quality, but it's certainly not, it is not my position to be able to come into a community in India and tell them that they need to not let their cows go into the Ganges River. So instead, having cultural sensitivity and understanding religion and values and morals has been really important. So in situations where we find that water is completely contaminated by E. coli, we looked instead for like a spring that was up in the mountainous foothills of the Himalayan region as a solution. Additionally, I find that building relationships is also important. So understanding the communities of which you're going into, but then finding people who would like to collaborate has been really fantastic. And Fulbright has allowed me to do that a lot of different times. So even not being a Fulbright scholar, but even in being part of that Fulbright community, there's ways to open doors and to network. So on the screen, it's me and my colleagues from Makerere University who work with the Department of Forestry and Environmental Sciences. So in understanding the research that they do and looking for ways that I can contribute to their scientific platforms. And then also looking to build relationships outside of academics. And so for me, looking at different forest reserves and sampling in them have been really important. And so making relationships with the forest rangers and forest guides has proven to be a crucial part of studying and understanding water quality, because the forest guides are the ones that are the most intimately linked with the water and the water resources. And lots of times they have great solutions too, but they might not know how to implement those solutions. And also on the screen, you'll see 3 of my forest guides. And what's neat about this is that each of these forest rangers are linked to different forest reserves. And although those forests were nearby and have different ecosystems, they've never been able to meet. So bringing others together so that they can talk and collaborate about ecosystems that they love have proven to be very useful. And looking at bigger groups, so I've been involved with the Global Interfaith WASH Alliance. WASH stands for Water and Sanitation Health. And this group is bringing together, looking in terms of cultural sensitivity, building relationships, and asking questions about the best way to communicate conservation ideas. So similar how I made the comparison between the attitude towards the Ganges River versus the attitude towards the Nile. That's what the Interfaith WASH Alliance looks to do. And a success story came out when I was there in India in 2019. The WASH Alliance in India was able to pass a bill that allowed the Ganges River to obtain personhood. And New Zealand's another country that has done this. And what that means is that the Ganges River, the Mother Ganga, as they call it, personhood. So if anybody pollutes the river, then they're going to be charged almost like a felony crime, because they revere the water as being holy. And so it was a way to go after and to target industry for doing major contamination. So you might be familiar that along the Ganges River, there's a whole lot of textile factories who put nasty heavy metal contamination into the river. And so it was a way to encourage them not to do that and to put financial penalties on that if they are caught. And I've done a whole lot of combined planning, and I've done this more so than acting as an academic, but acting as a consultant. So being invited to participate in different types of interest groups, different types of nonprofits. And I'm approaching this differently. Because I'm not there to ask questions. I'm there for other people to ask me questions and to provide education. So whether that's leading a workshop, or if they have a specific action plan that they're trying to answer, then I act as a means of a resource to do that. And I've done a lot of work dealing with water allocation, distribution, and resource management as more of a consultant coming in to provide education and resources. and really in most of the places that I've gone, I've been able to institute what I call a tiered teaching approach. So in working with a variety of different types of universities, I look to find graduate students, and specifically I look to find female graduate students when I can, and that's because in developing and undeveloped countries, women tend to have much less opportunity. So anytime that I can find some female assistants to pull in the field with me, I certainly will. But the whole idea of a tiered teaching approach is that I'll come in as I am in the picture, and I'll teach on how to do these water quality assessments. And I'm teaching the students, and then what we like to do is we like to link up with some type of youth group. In East Africa, the Jane Goodall Roots and Shoots is an environmental group, and they include youth that are ages 12 to 18. And these students are already naturally interested in environment and conservation and sustainability. So I'll teach the graduate students how to do a water quality assessment. Then those graduate students will teach the youth group, and then we'll have those youth group go into schools and give lessons about water quality to elementary age kids. And then those students can go and talk to their elders, the people of their community, about water quality. And it's a great way to disseminate information, and it allows the people in those communities to champion themselves, probably more importantly, and to hear the message and to translate the message into something that's meaningful for them. And lastly, so we can look for tools and education, but we can also look for long-term visions and planning and sustainability. So in areas that I've done a lot of work in East Africa, looking at the water quality and trying to make a difference for these rural communities, there might be 500 or more people that are reliant on a water source. It might be as easy as, again, finding a trench. And if there's money that's available through area nonprofits, we could even build something that's more fancy. So building something like a causeway that actually has a spigot could be a solution. But one of the bigger things that I've been involved with is trying to recreate buffers in areas that have been completely decimated. So whether this is Africa, planting trees has had great influence in the water quality. So in this location in Uganda, it's along Lake Victoria, and the trees were completely harvested for firewood. And we found that the water quality was terrible for those reasons that we talked about. So there was erosion, the cattle was able to go into the lake, there was no shade for the water. And this is where people were collecting for their drinking water. So again, they're using it for recreation, they were using it also for their drinking water source. And so we received a small grant, maybe just a couple $100, and we involved the Jane Goodall Roots and Shoots organization. We involved some of the youth of the community, and we allowed the graduate students to lead the expedition of planting. And truth be told, I was a little apprehensive, not very confident that this was going to work, because what I recognized is that we had to really champion the nearby people, and they had to hold up their bargain, right? So we planted the trees, but somebody was going to have to come in and maintain those trees and not let the trees get trampled by the cattle, and they were going to have to be watered, and they were going to have to recognize that you can't, you need to let the forest grow. And lo and behold, we planted these trees in 2015. The picture you see on the screen is in 2018. And so they were very fast growing indigenous trees. And the cool thing about these trees is they shed their branches. So there's still an opportunity for people to collect firewood. And when we went back in 2018 and did our water quality assessment, we found that it improved by about 20%. So now providing shade, the cattle were not allowed to go in the water anymore, and it reduced sedimentation rates. So we see an improvement in dissolved oxygen, ecocoliform, and also in rates of turbidity. So it's been a long 15-year journey. I'm really lucky to have been to all of these places and to develop relationships and to understand and to learn from these different communities. So I'm really excited to move forward in trying to answer and solve some questions about these sustainable development goals. And I hope by the time 2030 comes along, that we will have improved the water quality globally even further. And my main message to you then is to help where you can. Maybe that's in your local community, answering questions about water quality. Maybe that is encouraging people to be citizen scientists and to get involved in local adopt a stream programs. But I'm going to stop here. I'm happy to answer questions, comments, or listen to your short stories. My research website is globalwaterquality.com. And then completely separate from water quality, I also have a deep love for Iceland. I've been also going there since 2006. And I just published an advanced geological monograph about Iceland called Iceland Tectonics, Volcanics, and Glacier Features. And it was just published in June of 2020 by Wiley and the American Geophysical Union. So I will stop here. I think I gave you a lot to chew on.
Thank you for a great talk, Tamie. If anybody has any questions they'd like to ask out loud, you're free to unmute. Otherwise, I see that Brian Hunt had a question in chat, so I'll ask that if nobody else is going to unmute to ask. Or Brian, do you want to chip in? I see that you're on, if you've got a mic.
Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. That was great talk. And so I was just curious if your work involved going back to some of those locations after an assessment to sort of to see how things are going after the solutions have been implemented, or to give a target value for that community to work towards, and if that ever involves like automation, having probes that would be. You can't measure all those parameters, but it would give people a continuous target.
So in the developing and undeveloped countries that I go to, I find that if you leave anything, it's going to get stolen. So that's the first problem. And so what I've done, Brian, is, so as I mentioned, I'd like to make relationships with graduate students. And so I will, so I train them while I'm there, and then I will pay them like a small research stipend for them to continue to go back into the field, maybe like once a quarter at least, to collect data and to send that to me. And so that's a way that I can, I'm helping those students to, kind of like helping to give them employment. And then in return, they're truly gaining a skill set and they're learning. And I include them on my papers because I ask them to do some analytics with me. And so that's how I am able to kind of like you said, to do a check and balance. And then I've been to Iceland many times. So I do have like a great data set, but of course, like the water quality is not bad there. And then in East Africa, I've been back there several times. So as an example, that last picture showed tree planting. It showed, I was there in 2015, we planted the trees. I went back in 2018 to see that beautiful forest and to do the water quality. So in that location, yes, I have a comparison of like before and after and how much improvement there has been. And I do have people on, so in India, I was able to do a water quality assessment all the way along the Ganges, but I was doing like single point collection, but I do have students in Rishikesh that are continuing to collect for me. So yeah, I would love to have permanent instrumentation, but that just hasn't worked out, and they've always gotten stolen, and they're expensive. So for me, investing, $1,000 in a set of instrumentation and giving it to somebody that I can trust has worked out better than leaving things in the field. And even like I said, like I've made relationships with the forest guides, but I can have some trust in that they will like check on the probes that I leave, but it seems like somebody always comes along and either disturbs it or takes it.
It would be really cool to be able to have a continuous like year-long data set, so you could see how the water quality changes over the course of the year too, and see if that's, I'm sure it's related to weather, but also maybe different human activity across the year. That would be really interesting. But definitely challenging for sure in the places that you work.
Yes.
Does anybody else have any questions? If not, I've actually got a question. And it's very basic. I want to know how you pick your field sites. Like, do you pick based on proximity to human habitation versus pristine, or do you do like a transect up a river, or do you just go where you can get to without getting shot? Or
yeah, kind of all of that. So in Costa Rica, I've driven to look at national parks and national forests, and so I was able to get access to 13 different ones. And so when I'm there, then you do the best you can. So again, like access issues and how deep. So some of the forests are much more dense than others. So being able to like machete your way, upward can get challenging, but you do the best you can. Yeah. And that's kind of different than in Iceland, where like you don't have any trees, or you really don't have any limitations.
right.
Another question. Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
So I can tell you that in one of the forests that I was in Uganda, I visited it 9 different times. So I lived there for about a year and a half, and I was able to visit once a month, and I visited this forest 9 times. And then the 10th time that we went to the forest, the people hung a dog as a symbol for me not to come back. So
Thanks.
they're pretty deep. That particular community is pretty deep into witchcraft. And so instead of thinking that I was a great white hope, they thought like I was a ghost. And so we didn't go back there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm curious, if you do you have data that tells you so like if you assess water quality at a village that has cattle and people and everything in it, can you see a measurable difference as you go downstream in the improvement of the quality after a certain point of time? Like, does that, or does all the contaminants, does it just all go downstream and just get worse and worse? Or does it actually get better as you get runoff from other more pristine sources?
So in the one picture that I showed you with the cattle, so I think what you're asking, so when we moved the cattle, we immediately within the next month saw great improvement.
Right.
So
I guess what I'm asking is, if you had a village upstream, and then you hiked your way downstream from there by a couple miles, like if you tested that water quality, would that water quality be the same or worse as it was at the village, or would it actually improve from runoff from more pristine sources that are away from the village, so away from human habitation, essentially?
So the population density in Uganda is like 30 people per square mile. It might even be higher than that. And so there's always people and cattle in the water.
I gotcha.
Yeah. So it's really hard to say kind of like dilution is a solution, because there's so many people using
Gotcha.
it.
Gotcha. Cool.
Yeah,
Well,
so
I'll
that's
just
what-
remind everybody,
that's
if you're interested in meeting with Dr. Jovanelly, I see a couple people have signed up for slots. Linda McCall asked, did you correlate to groundwater quality data?
Gosh, and it's very rare that I have that. Yeah, it's very,
So
very
yours
rare that
is
I
truly
have.
like a pioneering data set.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because there's no wells. Like if there were wells in the area, that would be fantastic, and I would definitely try to do that. But it's rare.
Right. Okay. Well, I
In
think
Georgia,
that we're, I'm sorry?
in the United States, yes, I would say that.
yes. Yes.
Yeah.
She says, thank you. Well, I think we are about hitting our hour time limit. So, Tamie, you've got the link to your meetings. It looks like you have a meeting at 12:30, which is 1:30 on your end, and a meeting at 1:30, which is 2:30 on your end. And I was going to sign up for a meeting, but knowing now that you'll be at GSA, I would prefer to see you there if possible. I'd love to chat further. So,
Let's do it.
yeah, I'll try and get in touch with you here in a couple weeks.
Okay.
And for everybody else on this call, who's still on this call, please come join us again next week. We will be streaming live from the Bureau of Economic Geology actually this time, and our speaker will be Dr. Michael Young. Thanks very much.
Thank you.